Okay, so now we're going to take a look a little bit at how you manage this uh, complexity of the partner ecosystem in a trying not to write code. I think most developers actually try not to write code or try to write as little code as possible. And of course, for business people, then that's top of mind also. Um, so what I would like to do is I'd like to welcome Rakshith Rao. He's the co-founder and CEO of APIwiz. Tell me, Rakshith, though, do you call it APIwiz or APIwiz?
In true spirit of what is being done, it's APIwiz. We cannot mess with the name API.
Okay, great. Well, I'm glad we've got that sorted out because I always always fear I'm pronouncing somebody's name wrong, and I always wait for them to say it before I say it myself. But I'm glad you've clarified that. Thanks.
Great.
Okay, so I guess the challenge of connecting with now that so many systems have published APIs, it is possible to create new workflows, even those ones that don't. Companies and developers are trying to figure out, well, how do we API enable it? But how do they do it as efficiently as possible, especially given the you could call it the war for talent, the need for the demand for skills. How can we approach this without writing too much code?
Sure, John. Let's take it from the top and give a quick view of how the partner ecosystem within the API ecosystem itself for enterprises of all forms and shapes, how can they go about doing it with overcoming the complexities and the obvious pitfalls that's been encountered by various organizations already. Um, Over the years, enterprises have grown by getting more creative and personalizing and offering highly super personalized, efficient way of delivering experiences to their customers directly or indirectly. Obviously, over the years, it was more about making sure they remain competitive by building everything in house, keeping the secret sauces inside. What's been realized of late, and given the time to market, there is an innovation that can happen with working and collaborating with enterprises and organizations. Rather than building every brick by brick in house, there is an ability of putting things together, which obviously is driving business growth. Insurtechs, fintechs, a lot of these digital natives have shown the ability to quickly deliver new customer experiences at this by leveraging and working with organizations outside. And a lot of this is not new, and it's been around for a while. While some of them have mastered the art of completely decoupling and realigning their business capabilities so that they look at how do they package and create value for their customers. And APIs have played a phenomenal role over the years in making this happen. What started out predominantly as making it easier for applications to consume services has over the years completely changed to a new way in which they're allowing enterprises to go through transformation and create new business models by leveraging the assets and the services and the investments they already have. Rather than looking at this from a siloed approach, they're looking at this as how they can co-work and create new business models. Speakers before us in the track have clearly shared how new business models have been created, whether it's wallets and banking and digital banking services, or even capabilities for us to take what's obviously fairly easy for us to forget: Spotify, Netflix, and Uber, or Grab and Gojek in our own region. they have become super app providers, or the providers of content through Netflix or Spotify. They have changed the model of delivering customer experiences in new forms and shapes. Not sure if folks remember 20 years ago, people bought CDs and DVDs, which is not heard of anymore because we stream and use what we want, when we want, and where we want. This has been a good way for enterprises to build through an API first architecture, because it has allowed them to now not just take care of delivering the complete value chain and own and deliver by themselves. They can consume as well as work with other enterprises, fintechs, and new providers, whether it's eKYC or leveraging the settlement or underwriting of insurances, are being done by large providers, which still hold their channel business, direct business, but by being embedded as part of new partner ecosystem, they're able to deliver new experiences. People just take photo snapshots of cars and two-wheelers and get an insurance done in a matter of few minutes. People take care of getting newer ways to buy things and buy now and pay later, without having to go through credit card providers. So the way in which these are being possible has been fundamentally driven because of the API first architecture. But obviously, all said and done, there are certain set of complexities that has actually seeped in over the years, which is what this discussion is all about, in terms of the missed opportunities that enterprises have because of the underlying complexity of their own environment itself. The way systems have been built over the years, being both monoliths to microservices, using the so architecture or REST APIs, you name it, the way it's been done, the API ecosystem obviously has got various stakeholders, and they also get a bit more complex in the new age where they are being deployed on premise, on the cloud, hybrid formats, making it a bit more difficult in terms of controlling the access and security, who gets to access what and where, pretty much putting in a lot of pressure on teams to make sure that they can offer 24 bar 7 with very high reliable services. So the investments they're making to make sure that the stuff works is essentially either homegrown, open source, or taking bits and pieces of technologies out there and assembling them together. Obviously, it's fairly great to get started with an API program because you're looking at taking the core value proposition of what's addressable to the folks who are actually consuming them. Because you're coming in an outside in view, you're making sure that the investments are done right and well. But as you grow this program, it starts getting to a point where scale becomes obviously a very important thing to consider. And with scale, enterprises are now getting into obviously leveraging various sets of technology, and the the mesh of these technologies being specifically leveraged in various parts of the API lifecycle obviously puts tremendous pressure on how and when and these services can be leveraged for. Because what works in certain environments does not work for all of them. Automation is a great way of achieving this, and it has been by far proven the most effective way to get stuff done. But automation cannot be limited to certain parts of the API lifecycle, because for your API ecosystem to thrive, they need to be able to deliver a lot quicker and faster and be able to take feedback from partners and developers and iterate on top of them. So, which means the ability for them to self service, work with your services, provide feedback, test, and utilize them becomes even more important. While we all have heard about the fiascos where enterprises and gone ahead and released new versions without backward compatibility, breaking the overall downstream integrations. The potential impact of an API being down or not working as expected has high risk of defaming the enterprise as well as having downstream potential loss for partners. And to make sure that that never happens, this cycle needs to be so tight enough that it needs to go through rigorous checks and balances, and automation even being done is done being in bits and pieces, does not cover the entirety of the API lifecycle, which is where we see that disjointed communication between the various teams involved, adding to the pressures within the API ecosystem. What we have also seen because of this, the four key pillars of the API program gets impacted. Potentially the productivity loss because teams are spending more time in making sure that they are checking for things that are failing quite frequently, deployments not going as planned. They are investing time and energy to make sure that they're rewriting their and releasing their technical debts that they have accumulated over the years. There are various reports which talk about the potential cost impact of developers' time spent not on new innovation, because business innovation is where you see the ability to acquire more customers, more users, and everything else. But business as usual, operating and running, which is more important, also does require a lot of investment. And the automation piece is still considered as a niche skill set, and there are specific teams and people who have these skill set who are taking project by project, pieces by pieces and doing, which means you're still stuck with having to go through a major backlog of automation not being done by pretty much everybody as in within the organization. Going back to the potential impact I was talking about, regulated industries like banks and healthcare, others, and including the governments, have got high risks and governance that they need to comply with. Making sure that this happens, which means multiple checks and balances, who can do what where, and to make sure that it gets done either centralized or a decentralized governance is also debated within how it can be done and where it can be done. All in all, what we are seeing is a consistency mismatch in terms of ability to go get stuff done within a single end-to-end plane rather than going through multiple pieces of technology. Obviously, what we have seen as an approach to plug this complexity and gap is leveraging a low code or a no code platform, which takes care of covering the entire API lifecycle from design to deprecation. While it's easy to say it can be done, what we fail to realize is, given the proponents within the API ecosystem, there needs to be a well balanced approach to make sure that it can be democratized between both technical and the business side of the organization. Because obviously, when these two come together, is where the collaboration really meets the rubber meets the road for this. And to make sure that it can be done, there is a level of upskilling that needs to be done. If it's more simpler and easier with a no code no low code approach, obviously the ability for the larger organization to be able to deliver a lot quicker and faster is given. Moreover, while it's great to say we'll go about doing this with a no code low code approach, key factors that needs to be considered are two other pieces, which is how do you make sure that there is the checks and balance we talked about. If it's about going about doing the whole thing all over again with the same amount of effort being involved, then it would completely derail the whole system. So which means it needs to be done in such a way that it is interweaved into their regular behind the scene, so that it does not impact or have a big learning curve. And more so over, the hard control plane needs to be completely decoupled from the underlying technologies and the providers. I was talking about multi-cloud hybrid deployments. I talked about the service mesh and the gateway providers and the ESBs. Obviously all of them have their own ways of functioning, and it's not a bad thing to have multiple of them, but the learning curve of having to rework with multiple of these technologies become an impediment. So which means having an ability to focus on doing the right things without having to understand or learn the underlying technologies is a very important thing to keep in mind. So with these things in mind, API was focused on trying to make sure that we can help enterprises in going through with creating a successful partner ecosystem with a time to market that can be reduced at least by 60%, with over 75% reduction in outages and improving the reliability. What we also seen is going through the process of making sure that what you're exposing through to your partner ecosystem or developer ecosystem is something that's of use to both the people who are consuming as well as people who are actually being built within the enterprise. So to achieve some of this, having a mechanism to automatically catalog them, having an ability to track and manage and get feedback in terms of who is using to what extent, and notifying the people about new changes and new functionalities being brought to table is of a big importance. Just to make sure, going back to avoiding those fiascos of version changes and breakages, you want to make sure that you can notify them upfront, ahead of time, so that they can actually test them out with the sandbox environments. So that aligns from when enterprises are planning and designing their services for potential release, they have the downstream systems already notified and they're up to speed on what's actually coming down their pipe. And when you're building and deploying them, you want to make sure that it's free of any technology vendor lock-in, because you want to make sure you have the utmost flexibility of moving between technologies without having to have your internal teams go through and relearn a lot of stuff, and making sure you provide them with the ability to simulate and test them out on the test sandbox environments gives them the comfort factor even before the actual production rollout really happens. And moreover, internally managing the configuration management seem to work very well in reducing the number of outages when you're deploying stuff. The the ability to have seamless testing is both internally and externally important, because that is what will help deliver a more predictable release that can come out, because you're continuously testing and delivering them to the point where you have a good pulse of, let's test it out with a bunch of developers and partners and see what really happens. Because the model that you want to test with is both from consumption, from a monetization angle as well, and you want to make sure that the feedback you're getting on the newer functionalities that you can bring to table faster, with some level of testing that's done both in-house as well as with known partners. This also gives you the ability to tweak a lot quicker and faster without having to go through the complete life cycle of saying, let's go with the release and then test it out. And then we get a feedback with a major setback. This gives you potentially a way of doing it with a lot less impact. Last but not the least, obviously the power of an API portal, everything is well known. What we also fail to realize is, while it's being done for external purpose, there is an important piece that you need to take care of, which is, while you push for the adoption with the partners with an outside in view, what can you do to make sure that you can make the friction a lot less, which means the self-service capability, the ability for them to learn through with various samples and exercises and user guides and even pre-built frameworks that they can actually use to get up to speed. Because, like they say, every web page or a new mobile app has got a very short time window before people use them or uninstall them. The same with when you got choice of multiple map providers or location providers or weather providers, how would you choose? The most common answer is the one which has got the least friction to use and the one that's cost effective, because those two ones will have a significant impact on both adoption as well as the downstream revenue that actually comes along with that. Just to make sure we bring everything back together, we need to make sure that while there is a lot of emphasis that needs to be brought in to improve the developer output with high quality and reliability and everything else, the the enterprises are also more focused on making sure that it comes at a lot less cost. The ability and time to market can be reduced, along with having to get this thing done with a larger team being involved rather than a small niche team, which become the bottleneck for enterprises to scale. So that brings us to a big and where we can actually take up any questions from John and others.
So thanks very much, Rakshith. I think there are a number of things there that I'd like to explore. So one of the things is that when people hear about low code, well, particularly technical people hear about low code, they many start to fear, okay, so somebody's going to pick up something and create something for their own use, and then little by little, this application or API starts to become mission critical, and we in the IT department don't know about it, and we only hear about it when somebody complains that it's broken, and then we discover that this thing even existed. So the challenge for a lot of organizations, I think, has been letting people construct things, starting with all the way from Excel through to robotic process automation and other low code technologies, is how you manage that that governance, and also how you show people how to conform with that, because developers are educated in this idea of release management and the system development lifecycle, and it doesn't go straight from your desktop out to production. It goes through these different stages. So what are some of the cultural things that you see needing to change in an organization in order to be able to do to accelerate? On low code tools certainly can accelerate development, but there can be unintended consequences if they get into the uneducated hands.
Great question, John. Maybe I'll give you with some example. What we have seen in our experience of working with enterprises. So I'll give you two examples. We work with a digital native with like a bank born on the cloud and everything else, where they have somewhere between 150 to 200 APIs. And we also work with a large bank, one of the large leading banks in the US, and they have like 45,000 APIs. That's a magnitude of difference. And what we are seeing is some of them have been created over a period of time, like you pointed out, or somewhere in the labs or somewhere in the corner of organization, which they said, let's test it out, what happens, let's put it out there and see if there's an option. Over a period of time, people change and people forget, and they even don't even know that it exists. So it's a great thing that you pointed out. This has become a great reliability and a security risk for organizations, because what they're seeking from us and tools and technologies like this is there a level of visibility and observability that we can actually get automatically by platforms like this? Because what we want to make sure is we don't let things to happen by chance. So which means if there is an ability for us to know within the organization what we have and what's internally and externally being exposed, and what services are being used by who, where, and to what extent gives us at least a visibility of what's happening and how it's being leveraged. And this part of the whole thing should not be something that needs to be done by a developer or somebody in the DevOps team or anybody else. If you're going through the life cycle, the moment you're thinking about deploying, can those be cataloged? Can those be somewhere actually made aware of, tagged to make sure that these are services which are actually in production automatically, and there are release notes that are generated and tagged along with that, and there is a level of monitoring that's automatically enforced on those services. So some of these things are not in terms of, hey, we are going to be developing somewhere in the corner and somebody is going to actually deploy it somewhere else, and somebody will notify us through an email or saying that it's actually done. If there's a platform that can actually bring everything together and say, you know what, if you as an organization are serious about building, managing, and running APIs, you focus on the innovation side. And when you start building and thinking about deploying, the rest of the life cycle automatically happens without people having to even go through thinking about this needs to be done. That's the part of the low code, no code platform, John, that brings to the table of saying, leaving these pieces of afterthought and making sure there is no human intervention required. That's where the large value that can be brought to the table for enterprises.
Hmm. So I guess there's an aspect of not requiring humans to be involved in certain parts of the process, but making sure that the humans are involved in the process, know what they're
Hmm.
doing, and know what the practices are.
Correct. Absolutely. So it cannot be completely automated. And there are certain aspects of it where it requires human intervention. And even in terms of centralized definition of governance and decentralized by default enforcement of best practices. So that's the difference between where API programs have been successful and failure, because either there has been definition of these best practices centrally and it's given as a guide, and it's up to the developers and teams to actually take and actually use them in forms and shapes. That's where we see it's great, but the success of that is quite hard to manage. Or it's completely decentralized where teams come up with their own best practices and do it, but there is no organizational level harmonization that we see, which becomes more of, are we doing it the right way across the organization? And the experience is the same for somebody outside, because a partner really doesn't care whether it's being done by different LOBs or groups within the organization. They see it as one single enterprise from outside. So for developers and partners, it's very important to provide this harmonized view of the organization rather than the teams that are actually building them.
Great. Thanks very much for sharing that, Rakshit. It's great things to think about as we all try to make the most of our development skills and resources to scaling our business. Thank you.
Great, John. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the API days.